how it should be done.
I've heard and had believed this myself before I ever heard anyone say it about Tupac, trying to become the Bishop character from Juice, but that in Last Man Standing, I really thought it was intriguing how a lot of people kind of zeroed or honed in on that and talked about how he actually changed when he was around Suge. And this was intriguing to hear about from the people that were actually there, and how, he went from hanging out with the Crips to all of a sudden he was hanging out with the Bloods and became a Pyru and all this different stuff. So as those people are telling you those things, were they seeming like shocked? Because watching Last Man Standing, it seemed as though they were even revisiting it and just like in disbelief themselves.
Well, I think so. I think people were really surprised. They had sort of known Tupac in one particular context, and he'd been charming and very polite, and he was incredibly well read, incredibly educated, an amazing conversationalist, and obviously a wordsmith. And then they would see this entirely different side when he was around Suge Knight, and when he was, with all the gang members. And I think, Mob James had real problems, I think, with his relationship with his brother, who, he was with a lot. And I think Mob James and his brother had enormous fights about Tupac. Mob James's attitude was that, Tupac was a recording artist. He was not a gangster, and he wasn't part of the Mob Pyrus, and he was part of some weird death row gang, but it didn't exist in, he hadn't grown up in Compton. He hadn't been on the streets with them. And so I think, it became very confusing. And I think, Tupac became more and more involved with all the gang stuff without really understanding that it was kind of deadly. It's not a game. It's very real. And people were losing their lives over this kind of thing. And this is how people had grown up. And I guess he just stepped over the line,
Well, Lip Dog says, to your point, in the film, that Tupac didn't realize what he was getting into. And again, we've heard people say this, but to see it in Last Man Standing from actual gang members that were actually working at death row, that were actually there, is pretty powerful, I think. So.
Yeah, well, I do think the film, I felt that, we came up with a lot of very new material, particularly on the sort of ethos of death row and the Mob Pyrus and what they believed in and their world and how they dealt with other people and how Suge kind of ran death row, and so that one would understand more easily how it was that Tupac actually got killed, or how Biggie got killed, because it's part of this world that operates like that. That's why I spent quite a lot of time at the beginning of the film building up, what it was like to be at death row. What was it, like to be in those offices? I was pretty amazed to hear that they even used to have sort of women boxing matches and wrestling matches, and women got beat up there too. People would go screaming down the corridors trying to get into Interscope for safety, and Interscope would close the doors, lock the doors, hearing all the screams and stuff, so they couldn't get in there. I think that sort of I'm fascinated by that kind of behavior, given that this was kind of happening in a super expensive part of Hollywood, in unbelievably plush offices right next to where Jimmy Iovine and all the rest of them had their headquarters for Interscope. The hypocrisy was just unbelievable. It's hard I mean, maybe it's because I'm English, but I find it hard to believe this could, happen really.
Well,
Yeah.
to that point,
I'm
then,
trying to think of an English equivalent, but I'm sure one could come up with it.
but to that point, did you try to get Ted Fields or Jimmy Iovine or Dr. Dre or Snoop for Last Man Standing?
Well, Jimmy Iovine, and they've done their sort of like puff piece that was on HBO, and they don't want to. They have nothing but to lose to say anything more. That other guy that was Jimmy Iovine, Ted Fields, and the one who's actually running Tupac's estate.
Oh, Tom Wally.
Tom Wally, right? Well, he was the other one who was there. So they now have a big investment in his estate, and they've all done very well out of it. But so of course they don't want to take part in the film that might be critical of their role, and of course they knew what was going on. How could they not? So yeah, so it's a fair, I think I'm incredibly naive, but I'm just sort of amazed by the story. Really, it's just an amazing story.
Well, as you had mentioned earlier, though, this is sadly a part of America. It's an American tragedy of, overcoming shortcomings to achieve greatness and then losing it. And for what? To your point, like nobody won. That's the other tragedy of this. So
yeah.
Well,
I mean, that's and I mean, of course, I am surprised that there hasn't been more of a reaction to all these reports, but then if you look at what happened with Rampart, which was such a gigantic thing, it's all just sort of disappeared. Probably most people living in LA haven't even heard about the Rampart scandal or what was involved, or that 70 LAPD police officers were involved in this terrible scandal at exactly the same time that these murders happened.
Well, it's interesting you say that too, because there was a film, Rampart, with Woody Harrelson, and then the City of Lies film with Brad Furman and Johnny Depp and Forrest Whitaker. Did you see City of Lies in particular?
I saw City of Lies, and I remember seeing Training Day, and was it that the other one you were talking about? Was it Training Day?
No. Well, Training Day is about Denzel Washington being a corrupt cop, but Rampart is about. It's not exactly about the Rampart scandal, but it's police that were in that area, and they, I imagine, try to capitalize on the scandal to make the movie sell with the title.
Right.
But City of Lies by Brad Furman with Johnny Depp and Forrest Whitaker, I thought was very well done.
Yeah.
And that's why I was kind of intrigued with Russell Poole. While I understand, and all this, but his stuff did get attention, but then in the LA Times and other outlets, very quickly there were competing theories, and Russell Poole's were first, but they never latched on in a way that I think they could have or should have, given that the alternative theories didn't have as much teeth, in my opinion.
Well, I agree. And I think, as I said, I think Kading and the others have done everything to discredit Russell. He was somebody who'd had an improper affair with another police, a female police officer. He was somebody who had a drinking problem, blah, 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 blah. So rather than dealing often with what Russell had said, which was very credible, it was always to sort of point fingers at this man who, had foibles as a human being, which is, I think, what they do, and just slowly discredit him. And, and then there was, you have to remember, it was just Russell, who was probably under incredible stress, who left the LAPD, which he loved, and was suddenly, on his own, and he wasn't very good at business. He tried to open this sort of sports center to teach kids baseball or something, and he just lost a whole heap of money, and then I think his wife got fed up, and things just got worse and worse. So it was easy to pick Russell off in that way and kind of ignore what he was really saying and just say, oh, Russell, he's just a oddball eccentric, and we don't have to take anything he says with any credibility. I think that's what happened, and that was what was so sad. And then I think Russell got very depressed, and Russell did start drinking, and then he wasn't in any fit state to really be a spokesperson for his very credible theory.
And that's yet another tragedy of this whole situation.
Well, yeah, it is, and it's a difficult thing. It was in a way, I guess Biggie and Tupac was the first film of its kind when it came out. And in a way, it was a lot more interesting to do, or I wouldn't say interesting, but more, one was going over new ground, and there was, probably more of a feeling that it might lead to something. I guess it did lead to, well, it led to the FBI investigation, which very much came out of my first film, the Biggie and Tupac film. And it also led to the Valletta Wallace lawsuit. We introduced Russell to Valletta. But then they managed to sort of derail Valletta's lawsuit, by, well, obviously they hid evidence, which Kading says, he tries to sort of, it was just a mistake. Somebody just forgot it was in the desk. It's kind of like, yeah, this is like all the witness testimony that indicates, Perez and Mac were there. So I think it's been possible just to sweep stuff under the carpet. And of course, life carries on. There's always a new scandal. There's always something else happening, and so this time round, I hope that there would have been more of a reaction, in a sense.
Well, also with Perez and Mac, you didn't really mention or go much into the Henry Billups, Samir Muhammad. Why?
Well, because I'd sort of already done that. I was the person who got, what was his name? The big bodyguard, who got Harry Billups identified. Biggie's bodyguard identified Harry Billups as being the shooter, the guy who was dressed like a black Muslim, right, with the bow tie and so on. That had been in the first film, and obviously I could have put it in as archive, but my main concern in this film was to point out that Kading was completely incorrect about Mac and Perez. They were very involved, and lots of people remembered them. And you can't say that Russell invented this whole thing, that they were working for death row, and of course they were. And I think that just puts a big hole in his whole theory that the LAPD weren't involved in, So I felt that the whole Harry Billups thing was it's such a complicated story already, and you're struggling to try and make a simple story that people can follow without diving off on every little aspect of it.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, there's such an enormous cast of characters.
That is true, and it's just amazing. And
Gene Deal was the guy who identified Harry Phillips in my first film.
Yeah, the
Very convincingly. So I just decided to leave that aspect of it alone this time.
Okay. Now, the reason I was asking was more just a curiosity, since you did have some archival footage, but now I better understand. So, got it. Okay.
If I'd put that in, I would have had to explain Harry Phillips, his relationship with David Mack. Yeah, I think he was, I think they'd been on the force together. They were track athletes. He was David Mack's kids' godfather. They were, as thick as thieves. And, but it would have just taken a lot of time up.
Yeah.
I felt the film was already quite long and gangly enough. And there was so much in it. So, there's just some stuff you can't put in.
Yes. Well, there it is. Well, Nick Broomfield, thank you so much for coming through to Unique Access.
Pleasure.
Be sure to check out the History of Gangster Rap by Soren Baker. He's official.
History of Gangster Rap features exclusive interviews with Ice-T, Snoop Dogg, MC Ren, the D.O.C, and dozens of others. The History of Gangster Rap, a definitive look at how Los Angeles changed rap forever.
In Los Angeles, the streets definitely set the tone of the hip-hop music.
At 19, I got a $50,000 car.
My whole angle always was, I'll be street, but I will always tell you the horrors that go along with this life.
There will be penalties and casualties for just wearing the wrong color in somebody's neighborhood.
And once gangster rap made it from the streets to the TV, the genre exploded.
With Fab 5 on your TV back with NWA.
Yo MTV, it just catapulted us from being local heroes to national gangbang rappers.
The History of Gangster Rap discusses it all from 1980 up till today.
It's always gonna be shit happening in the streets. You know what I mean? So it's always gonna be something to talk about.
The History of Gangster Rap in stores now.